It was the kind of secret that didn't just haunt a man, it built a prison around him, brick by brick, silencing the music he once loved. Thomas Vance, 57 years old and bearing the weariness of 100, lived in that silent prison in Los Angeles. But Thomas Vance was a lie. His real name was Philip Rivers, and the secret that destroyed him was buried deep beneath the mahogany lid of the grand piano sitting unused in his dusty living room. Philip Rivers had been a name synonymous with power, ruthlessness, and unchecked success in the financial world. He built an empire that promised revolutionary energy solutions, drawing millions of investors. But the empire was built on sand, and when it collapsed, it didn't just take his money, it took lives. He fled, shedding his name like snakeskin, trying to outrun the ghost of the man he was. Now, he was Thomas Vance, a reclusive former accountant living off a small, hidden offshore account. His only connection to the living world was Lily, a 10-year-old whirlwind of defiant optimism. Lily was the one person who kept the darkness at bay, yet she was also the living embodiment of the guilt that consumed him. Lily was small for her age, but fiercely independent. Her most endearing and heartbreaking characteristic was her footwear. She insisted on wearing the worn-out sneakers she'd had for years, securing the loose tongues and holes with bright, mismatched strands of colored string, hot pink, neon yellow, electric blue. They were a vivid splash of life in the muted, gray world Thomas had constructed. One rainy afternoon, the air thick with the smell of old wood and impending revelation, Lily approached the piano. She traced the carving on the leg with a small, careful finger. "Why don't you ever play, Thomas?" she asked, her voice small. Thomas was sorting through old bills, a meaningless chore designed to keep his hands busy and his mind vacant. He didn't look up. "It's just an ornament, Lily. Dust gathers there, that's all." She tilted her head, her bright shoelaces dangling slightly as she stood on tiptoe. "It looks sad. Like it misses something." Thomas felt a familiar, sharp pang in his chest. The piano wasn't just an ornament. It was the last piece of Philip Rivers, a talent he had abandoned the moment the destruction began. Music was the only thing Philip had ever truly been honest about. He cleared his throat. "Go do your homework, Lily. Mrs. Brown will be coming by soon, and she expects perfect grammar." Mrs. Brown. The neighborhood's self-appointed warden of propriety, and the bane of Thomas's carefully constructed silence. She lived 3 doors down and possessed an uncanny knack for noticing things Thomas desperately wanted overlooked, particularly the inconsistency between his modest home and the antique quality of his untouched possessions. A few days later, Mrs. Brown cornered him by the mailbox. She held a flyer advertising a neighborhood watch meeting, but her eyes held genuine suspicion. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice a dry whisper, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but where exactly did you say you worked before you retired?" Thomas maintained a steady, blank expression, the mask of the boring, middle-aged man. "I was an accountant, Mrs. Brown. Very dull. Tax compliance for small businesses." She nodded slowly, but her gaze drifted past him, through the window, settling on the glossy black bulk of the piano. "That is a very expensive piano, Mr. Vance. A Steinway. I know because my husband used to dabble in antiques. It doesn't quite fit the narrative of a dull accountant." Thomas offered a practiced, tight smile. "Inherited, Mrs. Brown. From a distant relative. Sometimes the universe delivers oddities." Mrs. Brown didn't buy it. She never did. She was circling the edge of his secret, sniffing the air for corruption. The next week brought a deeper kind of terror. It arrived not in a flash of police lights, but in a plain white envelope delivered by registered mail. The return address was unfamiliar, but the name written on the label was one Thomas hadn't seen in over a decade, David S. Carter. Carter had been the lead investigator in the massive fraud and negligence case that followed the collapse of Rivers's energy firm. He was the only person who knew the true extent of the secret, the part that went beyond simple financial ruin. Thomas's hands trembled as he tore the envelope open. Inside was a single, laminated news clipping. It was a faded photo of a happy young couple, beaming. Below the photo, the headline read, "Young parents lost in tragic bridge collapse following Rivers Corporation infrastructure failure." Thomas dropped the clipping onto the kitchen counter, the silence of the house suddenly deafening. The tragedy hadn't just bankrupted thousands, it had caused structural damage to city property due to neglected maintenance, directly leading to the accident that killed those 2 people. Those 2 people were Lily's biological parents. The adoption was his attempt at penance, a desperate, secret payment to the universe. He used his last remaining influence and money to secure her adoption through layers of private agencies, ensuring no one connected Thomas Vance, the quiet retiree, to Philip Rivers, the monster. He had taken her away from the system, giving her a stable home, bought with the blood money of her parents. He looked across the room where Lily was humming softly, concentrating on tying a new piece of purple twine around her right sneaker. She was oblivious to the disaster contained in the single sheet of paper lying on the counter. The realization hit Thomas with paralyzing force. The secret hadn't destroyed only Philip Rivers, it was actively destroying Thomas Vance's potential happiness. If Lily ever learned the truth, she wouldn't just lose a guardian, she would lose the only person left alive responsible for her parents' deaths. That evening, unable to bear the silence anymore, Thomas walked to the piano. He lifted the lid. The keys were ivory white, waiting. He hadn't played since the day he saw the first police report with the casualty figures. He sat down and placed his fingers tentatively on the keys. He tried to recall the opening of his favorite Bach fugue, but all that came out was a discordant, shaky chord. Lily emerged from her room, drawn by the unusual sound. She stood quietly in the doorway. "You're playing," she whispered, her eyes wide. Thomas stopped, embarrassed by his failure. "I was trying. It's been a long time." It sounded angry, she observed honestly. "It is angry," Thomas admitted, finally looking her in the eye. "I am angry at the man who owned this piano before me." Lily walked closer, pulling a small wooden stool up next to him. "Tell me about him." "The man who owned the angry music." Thomas swallowed hard, trying to keep the name Philip Rivers locked behind his teeth. He was ambitious. Too ambitious. He wanted everything, and when he got it, he realized he hadn't built anything of real value. And that cost him everything, including his talent. If you believe destiny brings the right people together, type destiny in the comments now. Lily put a small hand on his arm, her mismatched shoelaces catching the faint light from the window. Maybe it just needs someone to play it gently now. Her innocence was a razor blade. He couldn't hide the truth forever, not while Carter was sending reminders. He had to prepare for the inevitable explosion. The next week, Thomas discovered Mrs. Brown had escalated her suspicions. She hadn't just been talking to him, she had been talking to the local property assessor and, more dangerously, the Historical Society, asking about previous residents of the house. He intercepted her one morning as she was pulling weeds from her perfectly manicured rose bushes. "Mrs. Brown, I need to know why you are digging into my history," he said, keeping his tone measured. She stood up slowly, wiping dirt from her hands. "Because, Mr. Vance, people who move into a neighborhood and immediately go silent, isolating themselves with expensive objects, are either hiding from debt collectors or the law. And I prefer my neighborhood to be safe for children like Lily." She knew something. Or, at least, she suspected enough to keep digging. The news clipping from David Carter confirmed that Carter wasn't interested in revenge, only in seeing justice served, which for Philip Rivers, meant exposure. Thomas realized that the only way to protect Lily from the fallout was to tell her himself, before the world did it cruelly. That evening, he waited until Lily finished her dinner. He sat her down at the old wooden table. "Lily, I have to tell you something important about me. And about your parents." Her demeanor shifted instantly. She stopped fiddling with her colorful laces and looked up, serious and steady. "I know who they were, Thomas." The floor seemed to tilt beneath him. "What?" She reached into the pocket of her worn jeans and pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. "My mom gave this to me just before the trip." Thomas recognized the locket. It was in the accident report photographs. He had assumed it was lost forever. She said, her voice surprisingly steady, "I was with my grandmother that weekend. I was sick. They went to visit the city to sign papers about their new small business. The papers they signed were with Rivers Corporation." She continued, watching his face closely. "When you adopted me, you didn't know I remembered things. But I remember the name. Rivers. They said the company was cutting corners, that the bridge was unsafe." Thomas felt the confession he had rehearsed for months crumble in his throat. He had spent 10 years believing she was a blank slate, a project in atonement. She had been carrying the weight of the same secret, recognizing the man who saved her, but also perhaps fearing the man who broke her. "I am so sorry, Lily," he whispered, tears finally blurring his vision. "I didn't just know Philip Rivers. I am Philip Rivers. I am the reason you lost them." He expected horror, anger, or abandonment. What he got was a quiet, agonizing pause. "I know, Thomas," she finally said. "I figured it out when I saw that old photograph of the CEO that the library had on their wall for the historical exhibit about the city's economic failures. Your eyes are the same." She put the locket back in her pocket, then looked at the piano. "That's why you stopped playing. Because he was a selfish, greedy man." He nodded, unable to speak. The critical moment arrived, the revelation of her true intention. Lily leaned forward. "But you're not that man anymore, are you? Philip Rivers destroyed them, and he destroyed you. But Thomas Vance saved me. He makes sure I have enough to eat and he drives me to school, even when he looks like he hasn't slept in a week. She picked up a piece of the purple twine she had been working with, smoothing it out. The secret didn't destroy him, she explained, her voice gaining strength. Keeping the secret did. Philip Rivers was destroyed when he chose money over people. Thomas Vance is being destroyed by fear. Lily's wisdom, wrapped in mismatched shoelaces and youthful dignity, was devastatingly accurate. The only way to truly defeat Philip Rivers was to embrace Thomas Vance and the truth. I'm going to go to the authorities, Lily. I have to face what I did. I can't hide anymore. She didn't argue. She simply stood up, went to the piano, and gently touched the keys again. Play something beautiful, Thomas, she instructed. Play the memory of what you're trying to save, not the fear of what you lost. He sat at the bench, his hands shaking slightly, but this time, the purpose was different. He wasn't playing to mourn the old self, but to embrace the new one, the one Lily had saved. He began to play. It wasn't Bach, but a slow, sorrowful melody that spoke of loss and desperate hope. It was a raw, honest sound that had been locked inside the mahogany prison for 10 years. When he finished, the room was silent except for the faint sound of rain outside. Lily was looking at him, a faint smile on her face. It wasn't angry this time, she said. It was true. The destruction of Philip Rivers wasn't the tragedy was the decade Thomas spent hiding from the consequences. Facing the truth, even if it meant prison, even if it meant losing Lily for a time, was the only way to truly honor her parents' memory and claim the fragile new life he had built. The next morning, Thomas Vance walked into the local precinct, the news clipping and David Carter's letter tucked into his coat pocket. He carried the heavy knowledge of his secret, but for the first time in a decade, he wasn't running. He was finally standing still. The true secret wasn't the crime Philip Rivers committed, but the profound, redemptive power of a 10-year-old girl who understood forgiveness better than any adult. Lily didn't destroy Thomas, she rebuilt him, using the fragile threads of destiny and dignity. If this story touched your heart, like and share with someone who is your true family.